So I wanted to show one more thing, which is like picking up something in the scene to change the way the scene works. So I have a couple examples for that. Again, not necessary unless you want to add this kind of thing in. We basically want to have other components of our map scene. And you could add this in the platform scene as well. Instead of just having obstacles, you could also have like little hearts that you pick up or whatever. But I'm just going to add these in the map scene. And basically what I want to have is like items that are kind of around, that if I walk over them or if I pick them up, I'll get an extra life back, or I'll get, some extra power or something like that. So this game is very simple. I'm just going to work with the life and then sort of like jumping as the two things to kind of play with. And so I'm going to make a new class for this that is going to be called an item. In order to have items before I do anything else, I need to add that to my basic map scene. I'm going to add that in here with the portals and everything else. This dot items. It's an empty array. And so I'll draw the items before I draw the portal. And the items are going to be kind of similar to the portal in that we can interact with them. So we're also going to be detecting a collision, but we'll be doing something different with the items depending on the collision. So I'm going to say for let I equals 0, I is less than this dot items dot length, I plus plus. So this dot items at I dot draw. So same thing with the collision. It's going to be a game object. So I'll just say if this dot items at I dot collide player. And then what we're going to have to do is figure out what we want here. So like with the portal, we have some text, and then if we hit enter, then something happens. And actually that's pretty similar to what happens with an item. These might be, another subclass, but I'm not going to do that right now. That's kind of crazy. So let's do something similar for now, and then we can update if we need to. So this dot items at I dot draw text. So we'll have just some description of what the item is. And then there's a couple tricky things here. So if we do pick up the item, then we're actually going to want to remove it from the scene, right? You don't want to be able to pick up the same item over and over again. And to do that, since we're using an array, we actually have to do something that you may not have seen before, but is a good thing to be aware of. With an array, we have like, a list of things. So let's say we have, 1, 2, 3 items in this scene. If you have a lot of items and you hit them or do something, there's a problem when you count through an array like this that can happen. So let's imagine this. So we start with for let I equals 0. So that's 0. And we look at this item, and let's say we pick it up. And so we would want to remove that item from the array, right? So then we would do whatever we do here, remove the item from array, and then go back to the beginning of the loop. The problem now is that items.length when we started was 3. But once we remove an item, we're subtracting 1. So now items.length is just 2, 1, 2. So then we go through the loop and we go to 1, and that's going to be now this item, right? Because if we take an item out of our array, everything moves back. And so now 1 is actually this one. And then when we get to 2, there's going to be nothing there, and we're going to get an error. This is something that, you're going to run into on your own at some point as you're writing code. But because I've run into this before, I'm just going to explain it now. So there's an easy way to get around this. We just count backwards. So instead of starting at 0, we say for let I equals this dot items dot length minus 1. And the reason that we say minus 1, let me bring back it's kind of hard to see now, but if I have my array 0, 1, 2, if I'm counting backwards, the length of the array is 3, right? 1, 2, 3 elements. But if I'm counting backwards, the index I actually want to start at is 2. And so obviously that's 3 minus 1. So if I'm counting backwards, the only trick here is that I have to say length minus 1. And then I is greater than or equal to 0. So we reverse the condition. As long as I is 0, we keep counting down, then I minus minus. Everything else about our for loop can stay the same because inside the for loop, we're always just referring to I. And so this is going to save us from this problem of do we want to remove the item? So then we're going to have to know some way if we're supposed to remove the item through some interaction. So we're going to want to do an update within the item. So I'm going to return a value if we're supposed to remove it, because we do have to remove it from the main array. So I'm going to say if remove item, and then we'll just call this items at I.update. We'll just put everything in there. And then if remove item, then to get something out of an array, we can use splice. So we can say this.items.splice. And splice takes 2 arguments, the element that we want to remove, and then how many elements. So if we, again, have our array and we say splice, let's say we go over 2, then it's basically just going to start counting at 2, and it's going to count 1 over. So that means it's just going to count 2. If we said splice, 0 to 1, or 0, it would start at 0. And then if we said the number was 2, it would go here, and it would splice this whole part of the array. And when you do a splice, the nice thing is it just moves everything back. So that's how we'll remove that item. So I think that's everything we need to do. So now let's actually make our item class. So make a new window and call this class item, extends game object. So it's just like our portals or our player or anything else in our scene. So let's save this as Item.js. And so the item constructor is going to take an image, an X and Y position, and then we need a label to know what the item is, or some text to explain what to do with it. So I'm going to say label. And so we'll call the super constructor of the game object. We have to remember that we already have a constructor for the game object that takes image X, Y. So we just have the super constructor image XY, and then this dot label equals label. And then we are going to have a draw text function, draw text. And I'm just going to kind of steal the portal draw text function. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. So we'll just grab everything up to here. This dot message we're going to have to change. I'm going to leave this dot X and this dot Y for now. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. Actually, just put this dot X, this dot Y. Maybe I'll put it at like the top, so I'll say y minus this dot height, so it'll be on top of the item, and so then this dot message becomes like, let's say enter to pick up, and this dot label, so we can pick up the item. So we need the text to tell the player what to do, and then in the update function, that's where we'll actually like do the event. So we're only going to call the update function if we already know the player is colliding, so we don't have to worry about that part of it. I just noticed typo here. I put if instead of var here. So we have to set remove item. And then now that I'm looking at this, like, I don't really need to do this. I'm just going to put this here. Let's rename this function so that's a little more clear what's happening. So let's say pick up. So if player picks up item. Sorry, I'm kind of willy-nilly changing function names here. So this is pickup. It's a little more clear what's happening. So for this one, we'll just say if key is down, enter. So if the player hits the enter key, what we want to do is, well, here's the tricky part. So here's what we need our callback function for. So that's the thing that I was kind of briefly talking about at the very beginning. Here, a callback function is a way of adding some functionality that doesn't happen until later using a function. And the reason I kind of want to do it with my item is rather than have like a separate class for every item, like getting a heart or getting some jumping thing, that's kind of not really what classes are for exactly. What I can do is if the class does everything exactly the same except for this like one specific thing, then I can make a callback function to do that thing when the item gets picked up. So that's the last argument this guy is going to need. It's called callback. And basically what a callback function is it's like an argument, except instead of just being a piece of text for a label or XY position or an image, it's actually a whole separate function. So like with our heart image, the way that this is going to be kind of organized is we'll have like this heart item over here, and we have our player, And these guys are both objects. And most of the stuff related to them is just, data, like where to stand or where to draw, what they're called, what the image to draw is. But when the player does pick up the item, something needs to happen, right? We want to give the player a life back. We want to say player.lives plus plus. It's really just one line of code, but if we put that line of code right here, then all of our items are going to do the same thing. If we put a whole new class just for this one line of code, that's going to feel a little bit crazy. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this piece of code in a function. So we're going to say function and we're going to put that function into this callback. So that's why it's called a callback. We're like calling back to this other function. So that way we can add specific functionality without having to create like a whole new class. So after the label, I'll say this.callback equals callback. So callbacks are actually a good concept to be aware of because they're extremely prevalent in a lot of JavaScript programming, especially for more advanced like node programming or more advanced web programming. If we hit enter, we'll call the callback function, this.callback, and then we'll say return true, and else just return false. So if we don't hit the enter button, we're not going to pick up the item. So I have my extra life image that I created. So let's put that somewhere in the scene. So after my other image, I'm going to say extra life image, and then I'm going to preload that. So that's in the images folder. For some reason I capitalized this one. I did it differently than how I normally do it, but that's fine. This is an animation, so I have to do GIF. So that looks good. And so now I have to decide what scene to put it in. So if I put it in the first scene, you're not really you haven't won anything yet. You don't really deserve an extra life. So let's put it in the middle scene. Okay, so in my middle scene, let's say let extra life equals new item. And so for the item, let's go over here so we can see. So we need an image, XY label callback. Okay. Back to the middle scene. So the image is extra life image. The XY, let's just put it a little over halfway down and halfway across. Next argument is the label. So this is an extra life. Finally, we have our callback function. So let's talk about how to actually create a callback function. So one way of creating a callback function is to actually have a function that goes in here. So let's say our function is just give extra life, and then we can define that function anywhere we want to. We can say give extra life, function give extra life, player.lives plus plus, that's it. Normally the way that you'll see functions like this is they'll actually just take this whole function and just put it right there. And then you don't even need a name for it. And so it's just an anonymous function. So that's the syntax that I want you guys to be, aware of. And this is not the best instance of this. Let's make this a little bit easier. So I'm going to say x equals width over 2, let y equals. I'm just moving these guys over here so it's a little bit easier to see what this is supposed to look like. So x, y, label, and then our callback function. So it just fits all the way inside of an argument, and it's really just like one line of code. So it's very simple. It's not really worth creating like a whole other class for this one line of code. The last thing I have to do is add this to items, this.items.push extra life. Let's see if this all works. And I forgot to attach the class file. So this is another game object. Let's put this down here. Okay, so there it is. My player's not anywhere. Uh-oh. Okay, so now that I'm done pretending I didn't screw that up, let's put this back here. Change the level to 2. And here we go. So I'm gonna go pick up this guy, enter to pick up extra life. It's kind of hard to read because it's white. So let's change the color there. That's in item. So let's do fill. Let's do yellow again. That seems to stand out nicely. Okay, so we see that heart there. I'm gonna move it over a little bit so it's like in the trees actually. That was in middle. So I'm gonna move it over like 400. Okay, so then if I hit enter, so you can actually see that my, the extra life got applied there. I have 4 lives, but it might not really, somebody might not notice that. So let's actually add a prompt here. So we can, besides like just calling this callback, we can have a prompt to tell the player what happened. And so we could put that here or we could put it in the callback. It's a little tricky to decide. So let's say if you do get a life, we can say scenes dot extra life gets new prompt. Well, you already know it's an extra life, but let's just say it. So you got an extra life. And what else do I need to know for a prompt? I need to know the title, the instruction. So let's say hit enter to continue. And then I'm gonna change scene to that prompt. So I'll say change scene to extra life. Okay, this is starting to get a little nuts. And then we also need to know when we change the scene where we're going next, if it's a prompt. So where we're going next is we're staying in the middle scene. So that's just the current scene. I think that'll actually work. And it's kind of nice because we are using this callback function already, and now it's all wrapped up right here in the main scene. So this actually makes a lot of sense because all of this stuff is related to how this middle scene works and not necessarily to how like a specific item works. So I think this should be good. I forgot to actually return false here. So let's level up by cheating. And let's go grab this guy. So we should see a prompt now. Enter to pick up extra life. Oh, because I was still holding enter. Oh man, so I'm gonna have to do the same thing I do with my prompt. So this dot enter started. So it went through the prompt because I had enter. So let's just copy this. You could maybe make a class for this if you wanted to, but I'm not going to do that. So, so we just have to call this dot callback here. So then I'll just return true here. Otherwise, I won't bother doing anything. Or okay, so then I'll say return false down here. Okay, so that should work. Let's see. So I'll go grab this heart. Got an extra life. Hit enter to continue. Cool. I did go back to the other scene. Okay, so I guess I'm also going to have to update. So let's say this dot. We are in the scene, so I can just say this dot player x equals player dot x. This dot player y equals player dot y. But that's something I would want to happen no matter what. If I'm leaving a scene, this is more generic. I don't want to have to repeat this every time I add an item. So let's go back to our map scene, the generic version of this. So if we pick up an item, then the item can call its own callback. That's fine. The scene changing should happen in one of the scenes. So Let's move this over here. We'll add the prompt here, and we'll change the scene here. And the only thing we really need to know is what you picked up. So we can just get that from the item. So we can say, I'm just gonna leave it grammatically ambiguous. You got this dot items at I dot label. Hit enter to continue. Okay, so this way I don't have to repeat this code every time I make a new object. Okay, so let's go grab this guy down here. Cannot read label of undefined. Oh, we gotta remove the item last, duh. Okay, I got an extra life. Technically I have 4 lives now. If you wanted to make it so they couldn't get above 3 lives, you could always just say, you got an extra life, but just say only if the player is less than 3 lives. I'm not gonna worry about that too much right now. So that seems to be working now. The last thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add a different item. I'm gonna do this in the last scene. So I'm gonna go to end. So for my last item, I made this little pogo stick drawing. It's maybe one of the worst drawings I've done for this. So I'm going to use it. So I'm going to throw it in there. So I'm going to load that first. So sketch.js. I'm going to make a variable pogo stick image, and then load the image. Pogo stick image equals load image images slash pogo. What is it? This one I named normally pogo underscore stick.png. So it's not an animation, it's just a PNG. And so if I did everything right, I should be able to just grab my extra life code and put it in the end scene. And instead of the extra life image, I'm going to put the pogo stick image. I'll leave the X and Y the same for now. I'll figure out if I need to move it. And then instead of extra life, I'm going to call this pogo stick. So that's the label. And then instead of player.lives++, I'm going to change the jump speed. So this is another type of data that's associated with the player. Although I actually don't have the jump speed in here, so I'll have to modify that. So in the platform scene, I have my jump speed hard-coded. So let's grab this -30. So I'll say player.jump speed. Go back to the player and say this dot jump speed equals -30. So obviously it can't be hard-coded if I want to change it, and it makes the most sense to associate it with the player. So I'll say this dot jump speed equals -30. And so if I get the pogo stick, I'll say player.jump speed, and I'm actually going to subtract, because the higher value it is negative, the higher he goes in the air, since y is, starts at 0. So I'll just add 10, so he'll be able to jump a bit higher. So that'll kind of help him beat the last level. So let's do I think this is going to work. I'm going to try doing like a playthrough of the whole experience, just to test everything. So here's my first scene. If I lose, I start over. So let's try again. If I just lose once, then I lose a life, but I get to keep trying. Okay, so I beat level 1. I can see I'm level 2. My score is 80. I have 2 lives left. Okay, now I'm in this new scene. I got an extra life, so I'm back to 3. That's good. I'm gonna fight these guys. Score is still going up. That's a good sign. It's not very hard, so I should probably make this level more difficult in some way, but that's okay. So then let's go down here. I can see my pogo stick. It really doesn't look like anything. I'm glad I put the red on there because otherwise it would be impossible to see. Enter to pick up pogo stick. I got a pogo stick. So I actually don't know what that means, but I might be able to guess that I can jump higher, and that's true. I can jump really high. And so now it's like incredibly easy. So even though I've gone way longer than I planned to, and I'm about to go nuts, let's add one last thing in here just to make the snakes faster. So the game does get harder as you go. And now that I'm on level 4, like there's no level after that, so I'm just kind of like here. So you could deal with that in some way. You could have like an end scene where it says like you defeated the whole scene. But I'm not gonna do that because it's just going over the same stuff. So let's just fix one last thing with our platform scenes. The snake speed, where's that? Oh, that might be in our snake. Yeah. Okay, so the snake speed is 10. So let's add a speed argument to the snake. And so then the platform speed, when I make my snakes, I can add a speed here, and I can base that speed. So it was originally 10. So let's start with 10, and let's multiply it by the level. So each level, there'll be faster snakes. So here, they should still be the same speed. So it's just 10 times level, which is 1, is 10. So because the level goes up by 1, that's why I can kind of do this simple math. But you might need another variable if you're doing a lot more stuff to make your game more complicated. But since I know each level that I'm going to arrive at, whoa. Yeah, so this is a lot harder. I'm actually doing okay. The nice thing is that my jumps go a lot farther in this, so I can really easily jump over the snakes, but it's harder to predict where I'm going to land. So it is actually quite a bit harder, and I lost. So let's go to level 3 so I can just test the last one. I'm going to definitely grab my pogo stick. This version is probably going to be nuts. I got my pogo stick. Okay. So this is actually way harder because I can't predict where I'm going to land. Yeah, I made that kind of crazy. That's okay. For some reason, my score is 10. How did that happen? I must have gotten a score. I must have passed a snake. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that. So I have noticed a whole bunch of little details of things that don't work exactly right. But things do work well enough that I'm going to leave it as is. This has taken a little bit longer than I expected. Hopefully we've covered some interesting topics, and take from this the things that you want to use and ignore the things that aren't really directly useful. Anyway, I think I'm finally done with this. So let's take our last screenshot. I'm just going to do save, and then I'm going to close this. And I'm going to open up my downloads folder so I can grab that screenshot and throw it in here. I'm not going to put it in the images folder because it's not part of my game. I'm just going to call this Snake Forest PNG. So I'm going to close all this stuff out, go to index.html, make one more project one. So this wasn't quite there. This is classy version is version 6. And finally, Snake Forest, Snake Forest.png, and Snake Forest. So finally I have my real final version of my game. Oh, I closed Chrome. Okay, so Snake Forest, there it is. Finally done with that one. So I'm going to close this out and commit final Snake Forest version. Commit to master. And Snake Forest obviously is just the name of the game that I created. You should call it whatever your project is. And yeah, that's it. That's it for this video. If you have questions, let me know and we can go over it.